Elie, how you feeling? This is a warm room.
Yeah, it's warm. The really bright lights. I don't see any ice here, so like, feeling pretty good.
So, for people in our audience, if you've ever looked around at a law and you thought, is this legal? This is the book for you. Before we start digging into the book, I want you to tell people what sort of fascinates you most about the law.
Oh, it's stupid, right? Like when you go to law school and you start to learn about these things, the scaffolding of America, which is really what our laws are, as you start to learn more and more, you realize just how dumb they are, right? Just how stupid they are, just how racist they are, just how misogynist they are, just how anti-poor they are. You can see, it's almost like Neo in the Matrix where he starts to see the code. Once you start to see the code, you're like, ew! Who would do that? And Thomas Jefferson says like, I would, and you get a whole different sense about what this country is, and so that's probably the most fascinating thing about my work, about my studies, about my journalism. You see where the bodies are buried in this country when you get into our legal both history and present.
So this book, Bad Law, and I just wondered, how in the world were you able to narrow it to 10? Because I see way more than 10 bad laws, but you go ahead.
Yeah, no, obviously scoping was the hardest problem with scoping. It's a very author term. It's trying to winnow it down, trying to figure out what the focus of the book was. That was the hardest challenge of the book, because obviously there are many laws. I have not read them all, but I understand from friends that most of them are terrible. And so how do you make your decision? So the first scoping mechanism I used were laws that could just be repealed. Not reformed, not massaged, not brought into a modern era, but just straight up repealed today that would make our lives better tomorrow. An example that I've used of a law that's not in the book, although I do mention it quite a bit, is the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. Right? I think the drug laws that we have in this country are terrible. I think they're provably and demonstrably racist. I think they penalize victimless crimes. But I'm not going to say we should have no drug laws, right? I don't work for the Sackler family. I'm not trying to get people hooked on opioids. We should have some drug laws, not the ones we have. But the Anti-Drug Abuse Act is an example of a law that needs to be reformed. I tried to focus on laws that I thought could just be repealed.
And I thought about that. You don't hear too much about laws just being repealed. Am I wrong? I mean,
Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare,
that was the only one,
1,700 times,
like
right?
The only one, right?
And then John McCain, right? And that was that. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Because when you let these old laws just stick on the books and metastasize and grow in there, you create the opportunities for Republicans in the future, and it's usually Republicans in the future, to go back and unearth these bad laws, to go back and unearth and reanimate them and use them for all new evil, right? Yeah. And we're seeing that in our news cycles today. We see Trump using the 1789 Alien Enemies Act,
Dusty laws, yeah,
to kick people out of the country. If we had repealed the 1789 Alien Enemies Act, and I don't know, any time after that in the last 2 centuries, it wouldn't be there right now to cause us problems. We see Republicans using the Comstock Act, which was a terrible anti-woman law passed in the 1870s by a guy who was really, just by the way, guys, like Anthony Comstock, like total pervert. Literally, he was one of those, and you see these people who are just like, oh my God, people are having sex. What's wrong with that? Where's my lotion? He's one of those guys. I'm not making this up. He was literally a mail inspector who got to open other people's mail looking for smut. Can you imagine just the sheer amount of whale oil he had under his desk while he's reading other people's letters? Anyway. Point is, this terrible law should have been repealed at least in the 1960s, but it wasn't. And so now Republicans are using it to go after not just abortion rights and abortion pills, but also contraceptives.
By the way, on the first page, third paragraph of the introduction of the book, you write, if it were up to me, I treat every law passed before 1965 as presumptively unconstitutional. That's a very broad statement, but Elie's about to back it up, so I want you to lay out your argument, counselor.
Okay, so first of all, lawyers in the audience know that the word presumptive is doing a lot of work in that sentence. But look, the fundamental thought is this, that before the 1965 Voting Rights Act, this was functionally an apartheid country, because not everybody who lived here got to participate in the democratic self-government of living here, right? Voting was highly restricted, mainly to white men, even after the passage of the 15th Amendment, which said that you couldn't restrict voting on the basis of race. Even after the passing of the 19th Amendment, that said you couldn't restrict voting on the basis of gender. For the most part, only white men had easy access to the ballot, and for the most part, only white men could even dream of being elected to serve in the legislature until the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The 1965 Voting Rights Act, by the way, is the only thing that made the 15th Amendment actually work for black men and the 19th Amendment work for black women.
Yeah.
So if you bring me a law that was passed before all of us get to vote on it, I'm gonna say, why should I care? Why should I care? I'm not saying that we can completely disregard such laws, but I'm saying that in terms of precedential weight, in terms of, as we're trying to understand the histories and traditions of the country, I don't give a damn about the histories and traditions of slavers and rapists. I just don't, not at the same level that I care about things that happened after, right?
Yeah.
There are some laws that the slavers and rapists passed that were pretty good, right? I say in the book, the Sherman Antitrust Act, really good law. I also don't like if it was a good law, we could pass it again. If it's a good law that we now all agree with, not just rich white men, but all of us agree was a good law, we should surely be able to pass it again, as in the case of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I think the 1964 Civil Rights Act is pretty great, but I will note that it was passed without really consulting black people, and that if you passed a Civil Rights Act with, I don't know, a black Speaker of the House, maybe that law would be a little bit different, even more robust than what they were able to do in 1964. So again, the idea that if we have a good law from our apartheid days, we should be able to pass it again, this time with the votes and opportunity to participate of all Americans, not just white male Americans.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I give you, that's a good argument. That is a good argument. And so we're going to go through some of the laws, not all of them, because you guys should read the book. It's really good. There's humor in there and Batman analogies. So that's a tease for you. And since you're just talking about voting, I want to start there because voting laws. You say voting registration laws are supposed to protect elections, but you argue that they do the opposite, and you write, quote, every single voter registration law is an anti-democratic anathema. How so?
Why do you need to go through two hoops to register to prove that you're able to vote, right? Voter eligibility laws are one thing. We can disagree about what those eligibility requirements should be, but at some level, we're all gonna agree that there should be some voter eligibility requirements. I might say you should have to be 16. You might say you should have to be 18. Neither of us are gonna say you have to be 8, because you just saw the Minecraft movie and you don't want Jack Black being the president. Like, you understand that maybe 8-year-olds don't have their finger on the pulse of America, right? So an age requirement is going to be an example of an eligibility requirement, right?
Okay.
Citizenship is an example of an eligibility requirement. And I can make a great argument for why non-citizens should still have voting rights, but I will accept that I'm going to lose that argument in this freaking country right now. And in any event, citizenship is an example of a voter eligibility requirement. But once you are eligible to vote, why should you have to pre-register? Why should you have to jump through the second hoop in order to access your sacred franchise? That's not endemic to the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it require any kind of voter registration requirement. It's not endemic to the founding of the country. The first attempt at a voter registration requirement was made in 1800 by John Adams in Massachusetts. I write about it in the book. It was straight up, all they were trying to do was make it easier for poor white men to vote. And John Adams was like, no, you can't do that, because if you let poor white men vote, next women will ask to vote. Oh, noes, was his literal argument.
Yeah.
So we didn't really get, mass adoption of voter registration until after the Civil War. I'll give you one guess why. Right? A bunch of freed slaves are moving north, and all of a sudden the North, not the South, the North is just like, we got to have some registration requirements in here, or else all these black folks are going to vote, right? So voter registration, from its inception, is designed to suppress the vote of eligible voters, not protect the elections from ineligible voters voting. See, I have to do it kind of rhythmically to get that right. And that's another point that I've gotten some pushback with the book, because they'll say, like, if you take away voter registration laws, aren't you opening yourselves up for election fraud, right? And I've got two answers to that. One, election fraud doesn't exist, so shut up. Right? Like, we're not going to make laws based on things that don't exist. If I say, like, oh, I want to fish, I have a right to fish. I want to fish in that lake. And you say, no, you can't fish in that lake. And I say, why? And you say, because the Loch Ness Monster might get you. I'm like, that's a stupid law. Give me my pole. I'm going to go fish. Get on my face, right? Similarly, voter fraud doesn't exist. And so making laws to protect ourselves from the thing that doesn't exist is incredibly stupid. And I won't have it, right? So that's number one. Number two, the Republicans say that the way to stop voter fraud is with voter ID, with national voter ID. And I say, really, I call that bluff. I'm like, all right, let's go. I will give you your voter ID. You give me a national voter ID that is easy to get and free, because there's a whole 24th Amendment against the poll tax, but you make a national voter ID that is easy to get and free, and in exchange, I get automatic voter registration and portable voter registration. That's another part of automatic registration, right? Like, my registration should follow me. I shouldn't have to go follow it, right? So if I move from one county to the next county, I'm still registered to vote in my state. If I move from one state to another state, I'm still registered because I've got your fancy national ID. So now I've eliminated your concern for fraud. Let's make that deal, Republicans. And who says no? The Republicans. The Republicans say no to that deal, not me, because what the Republicans are after is not securing our elections. What they're after is suppressing the vote. And my deal doesn't suppress the vote, and it lets them solve their problem that they know is fake. So even when I agree to solve their problem, they don't want to take the deal, because their whole point of making the fake problem is to suppress the vote.
Yeah. I thank you. Thank you. By the way, shout out to Pennsylvania's governor, Josh Shapiro. We have automatic voter registration when you get your driver's license or a state ID. That's not free, but it's a step in the right direction.
One of the things, Cherri, about the book is that I never ask people, there's nothing in the book that I have come up with my own damn self, right?
Yeah.
I'm not that smart. Most of my solutions in the book are just me looking around the world. As Fox Mulder might say, the truth is out there, right? And on the issue of voter registration, I'm just looking at what every other country does. Every other major democracy either has automatic registration, mandatory registration, where you get fined if you don't get registered, which is it's an Australian thing. It's like they have a Foster's and then they beat people up, and it's weird, but that's how they roll it. Or same-day registration. And same-day registration is almost as good as automatic registration, because it kind of eliminates the friction between being eligible and being able to vote. We have one state in this country that has no voter registration requirement. North Dakota. Do you have a lot of voter fraud stories coming out of North Dakota?
Nope.
Is North Dakota even a blue state? I mean, another pushback is like, oh, I'm just trying to help Democrats win. North Dakota, which has the system that I want, is that a particularly blue state these days? North Dakota has no registration because North Dakota has a huge population of Native Americans. and they want to make it easier for Native Americans who often don't have the same kind of identification and the same kind of just mail service that a lot of other people do. They want to make it easier for them to participate in their democracy. So there's no registration. Wow. And it's fine. Nothing goes wrong in terms of election security because North Dakota has has no voter registration. You could port that to the entire country and have a similar effect.
I never thought I would say this, but yay, North Dakota.
Right?
Never thought I would say that one. Let's switch over to immigration. And
Another easy one.
Yeah, this is an issue front and center, and the crisis at the border is one of the reasons our current president got elected, right? On the campaign trail, the president promised to deport undocumented people who had committed actual crimes. In practice, the only alleged crime that many people who are being deported have committed was to be in America, undocumented. And you write, existence should not be criminal. I want you to talk through how some of these really old, really crusty immigration laws are being used to, I guess, support a lie in many ways.
To me, there is no such thing as an illegal immigrant. You can't be an illegal person. You're a person, and perhaps you don't have proper documentation. And we can deal with undocumented people in any number of ways, but calling a person illegal because they happen to be somewhere is just not a thing to me, right? So that's step one. Being a what they call illegal immigrant wasn't a criminal offense in this country until the passage of the 1921 Immigration and Nationality Act. And this act, among many other things, made it a crime to illegally re-enter the United States, right? So you think about most immigration offenses were civil offenses, right? Like if you legally enter, it's a civil offense, and you can be punished civilly, but you don't get thrown in jail. An example of a civil punishment is deportation. That's actually a civil penalty, not a criminal penalty. Criminal penalties land you in jail. Illegal re-entry is what lands you in jail. It's what criminalizes your immigration status, right? And people think the classic example of a person who came illegally, was deported, came back, aha, now you've violated our laws twice, and so we can throw you in jail. First of all, shut up. I don't care. Like that's a stupid reason to take away somebody's freedom. But so that's number one. Number two, doesn't help, doesn't stop. When you actually talk to people who are habitual border jumpers, what you find is that their situation in the country that they are trying to flee from is way worse than anything you can do here or anything you can threaten to do them here. So throwing them in jail, they're just going to keep coming and coming and coming. People who have a lot of privilege do not always fully appreciate how desperate some of these people are, right?
Yeah.
But number three, where did this law come from? Well, when Congress was debating the law, they relied heavily on what they called science. The science of eugenics. They relied heavily on the testimony of America's leading eugenicist, a man named Dr. Harry Laughlin. Dr. Harry Laughlin went on to become Nazi Germany's leading eugenicist. We exported Nazi eugenics to Nazi Germany, not the other way around. This doctor got an award from the University of Heidelberg in 1938. Do you know how much of an asshole you need to be to get an award from the University of Heidelberg in 1938? But this is the guy, this is the science that they relied on when passing the 1921 Immigration and Nationalization Act. And the congressman at the time from both parties said that Laughlin's science was critical in helping them shape the law. One congressman went so far as to say that we needed the Immigration and Nationalization Act, specifically with its criminal penalties for illegal reentry, to stop the, quote, mongrelization of the white race by the inferior races. That's this law. And you cannot tell me that a law steeped in so much racism and bigotry is something we should still be putting people in jail for today. That is simply morally unconscionable. I said that I gave you the classic case of illegal reentry, the person who came and was denied and came and came and came again. But that's not actually what most people who are charged with illegal reentry have done. Most people have simply overstayed the visa. But when you overstay the visa, you have illegally tried to re-enter the United States because you entered once legally, but then you overstayed. That's a re-entry according to this law.
Yeah.
Another kind of classic example is the habitual seasonal worker, right? They come over for the harvest and they go back to Mexico. Then they come over for the harvest and they go back to Mexico. Well, then 1 year, because of a change, because of a clerical error, because of any number of reasons, their application for their habitual seasonal work visa bounces back. But they don't know. They're not chilling in Baja, like keeping abreast of the latest news from the U.S. Department of State. They don't like these gringos, no way. Right? So they come again, as they have for decades, for their seasonal work. Bam, illegal reentry. Bam, you're a criminal. Bam, we can put you in jail and take you away from your kids. One of the things that Trump did to figure out who he should deport, read the story earlier this week. He had a team of he or Musk, whichever president is the president today, had a team of 20 or 30 kids. Just run everybody through a database to see if there was any kind of criminal activity, sometimes as low as a parking ticket, sometimes as low as this illegal reentry statute, and they just made a binary decision to allegedly deport them all, and that's what they're trying to do right now. It is when we let these terrible laws fester on our books that a Republican in the future, and it's almost always a Republican in the future, to go back in and find new and horrible ways to use them.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, I've covered immigration issues in Philly for so long, and we watch efforts to fix this immigration mess. And you say there's a solution that's been kind of sitting on the table for a while. It's called the New Way Forward Act. Tell us about it, and why haven't people been talking about this? Because this was the first time I heard about this.
This is from Ayanna Pressley.
Yes.
A congresswoman out of Massachusetts. And she has a lot of really common sense reforms to the immigration system, but as I said, my book is focused on repeal. And one of the things that Ayanna Pressley says we just need to straight up repeal is this illegal reentry statute. Because if you do that, you decriminalize the offense of being in our country. And you put it back into its proper category, which is a civil offense. And we can debate, and we will debate, and we will have huge debates on what the appropriate penalties are for civil offenses, how we should deal with civil offenses, whether or not we should care at all. I'm not quite open borders, but I'm really goddamn close. I reject the idea that we don't have enough space for everybody, right? I've been to Montana. There's enough space for everybody, all right? And I reject the idea that we don't have enough resources for everybody. We are a wealthy-ass country. Our problem is with the distribution of our resources, not the generation of our resources. So I think that we can onboard everybody who wants to come here. And I also think in a more kind of realpolitik, practical way, that if you don't want people to come here, what you have to do is make this country so shitty that nobody wants to come here anymore. And I know they're trying. I know that's part of the plan. But just from a kind of macro level, again, if you think about the kinds of situations many of these people are fleeing from, to make our country, either you make their countries better so they want to stay, or you make our country so bad that nobody wants to come. And since neither of those two things seem to be likely official policy programs of this country, I think we better get on figuring out how to onboard all these people as soon as possible. Others are going to disagree with me. Other reasonable people are going to disagree. I'm not just talking about Mike Huckabee. Other reasonable humans will disagree with me on the ultimate solution, but I feel as a bridge to that disagreement, decriminalizing that at least takes the human rights violation out of the equation, right? Can we stop being unnecessarily cruel to people while we debate their fates, right? It shouldn't be too much to say, hey, Texas, maybe don't sick crocodiles on people who are trying to, like, that shouldn't be too high of a bar for this country.
Yeah. Before we talk about why the democracy isn't as democratic as it needs to be, I got to touch on criminal justice a little bit. It's been one of my issues for a long time, and you have multiple chapters about criminal justice and gun violence, which is why you should check out the book. But you have a chapter titled, How Can You Murder Someone If You Didn't Kill Anybody? That chapter had me saying, yes, right? And I told you how Pennsylvania is really wonky. We have so many people who are serving life sentences right now who never took a life because they were convicted under a felony murder statute. You say these felony murder statutes need to be repealed.
Pennsylvania was the first state in the union, in the new nation, to issue a felony murder statute. And what felony murder means is that if you are participating in a felony and somebody dies, you can be charged with murder, just as if you had yourself killed the person, right? So when I say it that way, a lot of you guys are going to think that makes a lot of sense, right? And we can all kind of think of scenarios in which we kind of would want that to happen, right? If you were the victim of a violent crime, somebody broke into your house and lit your house on fire or whatever, beat up, raped and murdered your family, and there was just the guy who helped them get into your house, you'd be like, well, everybody who broke into my house and raped and murdered my family should be charged with murder, not just the trigger man. Like, that makes sense. But now I'm going to tell you, we already have a law to get that guy. It's called accomplices, right? We already have laws that criminalize people who are accomplices to murder, who take some active part, active role in the intentional murder of another human, right? We also already have laws that cover people who aid and abet a criminal activity that leads to murder, right? I mentioned in the book, if you say, like, I gotta kill Darius, and I go, well, Darius works at the gas station from 9 to 12, and out back, that camera ain't been working for 2 years. Just say, guess what? I'm an accomplice. I've aided and abetted Darius's murder, right? You can get me, right? If you are a drive-by shooter, right? If I'm driving the car and you lean out of the side of your car and you shoot Ricky, well, guess what? You can charge me for... Felony murder covers people who did none of these things. Felony murder covers people who were just there. Felony murder covers people who were just committing some non-murdery felony, and their boy or accomplice loses their mind and starts shooting up the place. And then you charge that person who was just there with murder, right? If that still seems like, maybe sometimes we want to do... Here's how it's mostly going to happen, though. Felony murder charges you with murder when the cops shoot your friend. You're committing a felony. The cops come. You try to run away. The cops open fire, kill your boy, catch you. Guess what? You're a murderer now. You can be charged with felony murder. Cops serve a warrant on your house. You try to get away. You try to hop out the bathroom window, evading arrest. That's a felony. Cops bust into your house, shoot your wife and kids. You get charged with the murder for your wife and kids because you were trying to get away, committing a felony, and the cop insanely opened fire. Felony murder in Pennsylvania is why most people who are on life sentences for murder in Pennsylvania are on life sentences for felony murder, not murder. And it's also one of the most sexist criminal laws we have. Most women, not just in Pennsylvania, but most women in the nation who are in jail for murder are in jail for felony murder. And in those situations, a lot of times, what you're talking about is a survival act. They're in an abusive domestic relationship. The boyfriend says, drive this car while I go rob this bodega, or I'll beat up your kids. She says, okay. She parks the car. She's idles outside. The guy goes into the bodega and shoots the whole bodega up, comes back in the car, drive. She drives. Now, when the cops catch them, they're both charged with murder. Him with murder, her with felony murder, when all she did was drive the car. She didn't know that a murder was going to go down, and most likely she was pressured into that. situation. Most women in this country who are in jail for murder are in jail behind this statute.
Yeah.
It is awful.
Yeah.
And it could be so easily repealed while still having a whole lot of people in jail for murder, or accomplices in jail for murder, or people who aided and abetted in jail for murder, right? We're not talking about letting the arsonists go free, right? We're talking about and this is a theme that I have not only throughout my book, but throughout all of my work. We should charge people for what they do.
Yeah.
Not what they're thinking about doing, not what other people do in their name. We should charge people for what they do. Trust me, people do enough shit that we'll have enough crime to charge them with, but just charge people for what they actually did.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you. I want to talk about democracy, and in about 8 minutes or so, we're going to open it up to questions from you, our audience. But you make a scathing critique of American democracy, and I'm using air quotes around democracy there. You write, the United States has the least representative democracy among the representative nations of the world. You say, that's not a vibe, that's a fact. I love how you write. Give me little giggles. And you point to Congress. You also point to the House and the Senate. I want you to make how can we make our democracy, and a lot of people would disagree because, we are very prideful about this part of America. We are like, we are a democracy. How can we make it better and more representative?
Yeah, well, there's nothing we can do about the Senate. The Senate should be abolished. It's a poison pill for slavery. It gives land more power than people. But unfortunately, and not a lot of people know this, the Senate cannot be amended through the Constitution. It is the one part of the Constitution that the Constitution says you cannot amend through the amendment process in the Constitution. The slavers knew what they were doing when they came up with the Senate. You can only change the Senate by literally having a whole new constitutional convention. Mm-hmm. So practically, there's nothing. There are things that we can do to mitigate it, like, I don't know, admitting DC, Puerto Rico, some other states, maybe reconstituting North and South Dakota back into one state. There are things we can do, but the fundamental structure of the Senate, you can't change. Congress is a whole different story. 435 congressmen, where did that number come from? And I will tell you, they pulled it out of their ass. It has nothing to do with anything real. That's not how many Congress people we started with. Mm-hmm. We started with, 130, I wrote it down so I didn't have to remember. Right? And then everybody knows every 10 years we have a census, and every 10 years we reapportion the Congress people from this state to that state. Oh, New York lost 2, Arizona gained 1, right? Everybody's used to that process. Totally new. Before the 1920s, whenever we would have another census and a state would increase their congressional representation, we would just add more Congress people. We stopped doing that in the 1920s, and it's not because we ran out of chairs, right? It's not because we lost the technology on that. It's because the 1920 census was the first census that really showed the shift in power from the rural agrarian past into the cities. And to add more congressmen after the 1920s would have been to add an immense amount of Congress people into the actual cities where people were increasingly living. And so what the Wilson administration, the Woodrow racist Wilson administration, decided to do with the 1920 census was ignore it. The 1920 census is sometimes called the law census. It's the only census where we did not reapportion. We were just like, no, and threw it out. Before the 1930 census, we had this new law. And the new law artificially capped the number of Congress people at 435. And then from 1930 on, all we've done is shift them back and forth. There's no reason for that. If we had kept the same level of representation, right? If one congressman represented as many people as they did in 1920, we'd have 1,200 Congress people right now. Now, when I say that we're the least representative democracy on earth, one American congressperson represents about 760,000 people, 760,000 citizens. That is the worst ratio in the developed world. The next closest country to us is Japan, where one person in their lowest legislature, which I cannot pronounce at all, it's not called Nintendo, so I am out of my element. When it comes to the Shingir, something like that. One Japanese lower house representative represents about 520,000 Japanese citizens. So that's how far away we are. Like, we're the worst, and number 2 is 200,000 people better than us, right? And it just goes all the way down the line till you get to England, where like one person represents like a bar, right? We could change, if we changed the number of congressmen, not only would that make more representation for us at the congressional level, think about what that does to the Electoral College. All right? Remember, the Electoral College is based on your state's number of congresspeople plus their 2 senators. In this situation where we can't change the Senate, those 2 senators sometimes have an outsized weight, but in a world where it's 535 congressmen and 100 senators, that uneven representation of the Senate really stings. In a world where there's 1,200 congressmen and 100 senators, I think that matters a lot less. And suddenly, bigger states where more people live, have, proportionally speaking, a bigger say in who becomes president. Even if you don't like 1,200 congresspeople, right? Even if you think that's maybe somehow too many, because the number of representation that we had in 1920, that's also a number kind of pulled out of one's ass, right? Maybe that's not the right number, I don't know. In my book, I argue for what the scholars call the Wyoming plan. Most people know every state gets at least one congressperson, no matter how small your state is. Our least populous state is Wyoming. Wyoming has 570 or so thousand people. That means every congressperson should represent 570,000 people. Every congressperson should represent the population of our least populous state. That's the basics of the rule. If we did that, we'd have 700 congresspeople. Let's go, right? It's a simple fix, and it can be done by statute. And bam, I promise you, Mike Johnson would not be Speaker of the House in a world with 700 plus congresspeople. I'm not sure the Republicans could ever elect a Speaker of the House in a world where 700 congresspeople, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I thought to myself, wow, 2 Dakotas and 1 California. That don't seem right to me. Anyway, so we only have a couple minutes before we open it up to questions. This book will probably have a lot of folks thinking. It definitely got me thinking. Who do you hope reads this book, and what do you hope they do with it? Who should?
That is a question.
And you should write this down. Maybe y'all need to send them a copy. Go ahead.
I have not gotten that question on this entire tour. I mean, I would like Chuck Schumer to read it.
Give me your list. Give me your dream list.
I fear that if he did, he would just like wave it around. He wouldn't actually read it. He would just like wave. I read a book today. Wouldn't actually go through it. Look, I want. So one of the questions I have gotten over the course of the tour was like, would I have written this very book if I knew that Trump was going to be president when it came out? Because obviously I wrote the book primarily before the election, right? And I've always said yes, because the copy was locked before Joe Biden's debate. So there was no point in this book where I was just like, we're gonna win. Like, hope came after the book was at the publisher, man. So as I'm writing it, I'm very much thinking, well, if we lose, and it looks like we're gonna lose, this becomes my start at Project 2029.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's who you, yeah.
This becomes the start of what can we do if we're ever allowed to take power again. What can we go in and from day one have a real positive agenda to do? Because I didn't want to write another Orange Man bad book, right? Because the Orange Man is very, very bad, and they don't care. I mean, that we've explored the studio space with that. Too many people do not care that the Orange Man is bad. So instead of just saying that, I tried to think of a positive policy agenda that you could start to coalesce around.
Yeah.
I would love if people who are in charge of making that policy agenda would read the book and pick, I mean, I wrote 10, pick one, right? Pick one to try to get people interested in doing. I wrote not just about federal laws, I wrote about federal and state laws to give people like different levels of activity that they could kind of get in there, right? Because some people are really into their local and state government. I've got laws like felony murder that you can get rid of at the state level. I've also got federal laws in there. I've got the Hyde Amendment in there. The Hyde Amendment is a budgetary writer, right? All these people are just like restoring Roe. Get rid of the Hyde amendments. Like, for starters, that's easy. Like, some of the laws that I talk about are difficult political lifts. Like I mentioned, we should probably repeal the Second Amendment. Probably not happening in my lifetime, but that's a heavy political lift. There are some of these things that aren't particularly heavy political lifts. There are some of these things that the Democrats already agree are bad, but won't try to get people motivated to change. So I guess I would love it if the change makers would at least consider. I would love it if the change makers would consider coming into office with a sledgehammer to smash things that are bad, instead of always coming in with super glue and duct tape trying to piece back together some institutions that actually weren't working in the first place.
Yeah, and they can take this as a starter list on what to repeal. Elie, this has been a pleasure. We're going to open it up to questions from you, our audience. We're going to flip the lights on. I see the hands popping up, and I saw the heads nodding. I love it. And if you could stand up, I guess we'll start right here and then kind of move over there and move back over here. Say your name and then your question.
Hi, my name is Jeff Sedwin. Given the level of competency of the cabinet and the wholesale dissembling of the government, do you see that there's going to be maybe a complete collapse once people stop getting the services that they are used to?
Well, what do you mean by complete collapse, right? Because historically speaking, governments do not collapse from the inside, right? They collapse from outside pressure. It's like Nazi Germany completely collapsed, right? But that took a lot of bombs, not from them. Governments internally evolve and revolve, right? The Roman Republic didn't completely collapse. Augustus was calling himself a Republican dictator for life for 40 years, right? And so I guess that's the thing that I worry about most. I feel like people keep waiting for like the day that the New York Times says fascism coming on Wednesday, and it's like, okay, Wednesday is the day we go from a democracy to. That's never how it happens, right? We are in the constitutional crisis right now. We are living under the whims of a tyrannical dictator right now, today. And our response to that is not yet like we are living under a fascist tyrannical dictator. And like, I'm kind of waiting for that to happen. I guess my worry is that it never happens and people just get used to this, normalize it, and this becomes everybody's new reality. And so that by the time that Trump is running for a third term, or that he does bequeath his presidency to Don Jr. And Don Jr.'s cocaine hookup, that we're just all like, oh, well, what did you expect to happen? Like, the slow slouch into fascism is much more likely because it's never one flashpoint, right? And so that's my more worry, as opposed to a collapse of the government, right? Just a acceptance of this government.
Thank you. I saw somebody right over here.
Please tell us about your plans to run for Congress.
Would you do it?
No. I appreciate the love, but I am. So I do think that there are people who work well on the inside and people who work well on the outside, and I'm more of an outside game guy than an inside game. I can't think of anything worse for me than having to sit in a committee hearing with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, how does that? And there's almost no way that I come out winning there. I mean, as much as like you might think, well, I would tell her a what for. She doesn't care, right? And she would say something racist, offensive to me, and I would probably react like some evil person said something racist and offensive to me. And then what's on the TV news is not, Elie has intellectually destroys Marjorie Taylor Greene. What's on the news is like black man strangles white woman to death, right? And like, then I gotta get a lawyer and I gotta talk. Felony murder is not like, I don't wanna. So that's why I don't run. I think I have Look, what Jasmine and Crockett is doing right now, what AOC is doing right now, like, it takes a certain personality and mentality to go into that particular den every day and fight, but also be willing to work with these people in a way that I'm not.
All right. We have this one right here with the glasses.
The book is amazing. I loved it. Thank you very much. My question is this ABC. Of the 10 laws that you write about, which do you think is the most important to repeal? Which would be the easiest to repeal? And which do you think would be the most likely to get repealed if it could happen?
That's actually easy. Voting. Voting is the most important by far. I mean, like, it's the key to the kingdom. It's the key to democratic self-government. You can get Democrats to talk about voting rights, at least about expanding voting rights, more than you can get them to talk about almost anything else that I wrote about. All the criminal justice reform stuff I wrote about, Democrats are gonna be like, well, we gotta support the cops. I'm like, dude, I even say anything about the cops. Well, we gotta support the cops. I'm not even talking, if you don't support, you're like, defund the police. Like, what the fuck is going? Like, trying to get Democrats around criminal justice reform is like super hard. Democrats, only recently did people like Joe Biden learn how to say the word abortion, right? Getting them to actually move with urgency on that issue is still very, male Democrats, women Democrats have, for a while been trying to be like, guys, they're taking our bodies over. Chuck. Right? But those are heavy lifts. Voting, Democrats understand that when you suppress voting rights, it's an existential threat to their party, right? They need as many people voting as possible, right? Republicans don't. Republicans do better when fewer people are allowed to vote, generally speaking, than Democrats do. So I think that is obviously the most impactful and the most likely, because I think it's the closest the Democrats are willing to actually play ball on, and because the Republican argument against voter fraud is so freaking weak. And I know that it scares the crap out of a certain kind of a Democrat, but it's so fundamentally weak and provably false that I think that, again, with the kind of deal that I was suggesting, look, Republicans are gonna want voter ID anyway, right? And all I'm trying to get Democrats to do is well, if you're gonna lose that battle, get something for it. Get automatic registration for it. You should actually be able to make that. In the same way that, if you're old enough, you might remember Republicans used to, we gotta have tort reform. We gotta stop these tort lawyers and whatever. I was like, well, if I would have traded tort reform for Obamacare, right? You give me, I'll give you tort reform, and you'll give me votes for Obamacare.
Yeah. And I saw some people in the back over there. We'll get one of the people back there, and then we'll come back up here. And then we'll go over there to you after this one, yeah.
Hi, my name is Fletcher Boyd, and my question is do you think these laws are going to stay like this because not enough young people take enough stock or interest in the civics process, and to follow that, get involved in it?
Well, I will not crap on young people. I think the kids are generally all right, and I say that as a Gen Xer, right? I say that as a kind of, Winona Ryder, you're so sexy. Would you I'm that generation of person, right? And my generation has failed. We have fully failed. Gen X is the Trumpiest generation in this country. I know, it's pathetic, right? I feel like, in the Matrix, it's the smell, if there is such a thing, right? We have failed to, and as a black Gen Xer, we have particularly failed to back up our parents. We have failed in our parents' eyes. We have failed to take the next step. My upbringing, I will have been brought up in a more racially tolerant world than my children, and that is a failure of my generation. So in that context, I am not qualified to say negative things about millennials and Gen Z's political participation, right? They're doing more than we did, and they haven't lost yet. And so a lot of times I try to tell people of my age and older, we're the ones who need to get out the way, right? We're the ones who need to transition from a leadership role to a support role, right? The analogy that I always make is like, I bring my kids to the soccer game, I'm bringing orange slices, right? That's my job. My job ain't to score the goal, right? My job isn't to hit the shot. My job is to bring orange slices. My job is to take the kids out for pizza afterwards and say, good job, right? In the political context, I have what young people would call disposable income, right? I have a thing that young people can't spell. It's called a mortgage. That gives me the ability to help, to support, to fund. And if they want some of the benefit of my experience, they are welcome to ask. I'm easy to find. But I should not be the person leading their charge. I don't know TikTok. I don't know what to do with that. They know what to do with that, right? I don't know what to do with Twitch. I know it exists. I watch some Twitch streamers, and I think, why aren't Democrats here? Why is it always PewDiePie? Why is it always like the most racist white guys on this forum? Why don't we have more Democrats there? But I'm not the guy that's gonna like have the winning Twitch stream. What I can do is help the young people who are having the winning Twitch stream by making sure, by donating money, connecting them to my contacts, so maybe they can get real funding for their efforts. Like, that's my role. And I would encourage other people of my age to accept our failure and transition into that helper mode. The kids are, when I talk to young people, I can talk about all I want about fascism and democracy and whatever, and they're like, the world is burning, old guy. What the fuck are you doing about that? And I'm like, see, you don't have kids yet, so like, plastic diapers, trust me, you're gonna want those. At some point, young buck. But like, that's the conversation that I'm having. I don't worry about them politically. I worry about us getting out of their way.
Yeah. And we can take one more question. Oh my goodness. I don't know. You pick somebody. Yeah.
Remember, I'm doing a book signing afterwards. I'm happy to take questions as I'm signing books.
Yes.
Mr. Mystal, thank you so much for being here. Great, thank you. My question happens to be about really the first time I saw you on MSNBC talking about the Supreme Court. The last time there was a confirmation hearing on television, I screamed so much I didn't have a voice the next day. As common people, what can we do about the Supreme Court?
Ooh, we
Yes.
didn't even touch on the court. This is good. This is good.
Perfect closeout question for me. So for me, a lot of that focus has to be in the Democratic primaries. One of the things that Republicans understand and have always understood is that the court is important because their voters make it important, right? You can go to a Republican voter and they can barely spell, right? But they can tell you, we need the Supreme Court. Why? Because they understand civics? No. Because they understand, well, we need the Supreme Court to protect our guns, right? If we don't have the Supreme Court, then gay people might be kissing on each other in front of me. Got to have the Supreme Court for that, right? Republicans fundamentally understand how important the court is, and Democrats don't. Fundamentally, we don't punish our politicians for being weak on the Supreme Court. Dick Durbin recently announced his retirement, thank God, at the age of 80. Was a terrible chair of the Democratic Judiciary Committee, right? Before that, though, Dianne Feinstein was the chair, and she sucked. Before that, Pat Leahy was the chair, and he sucked. Before that, Joe Biden was the chair, and he sucked at being the chair. Clarence Thomas would say, thank you, Joe. So I've just named the last 4 heads of the Judiciary Committee from the Democratic Party, and they were all weak, moderate people who did not take the courts nearly as seriously as their counterparts, right? And that can only be dealt with in the primary, right? There was a guy, Sheldon Whitehouse, who should have been the chair of that committee. Durbin straight up pulled rank on him, right? Now, hopefully, it'll be White House's job, and whatever they allow the Democrats to do in the next Senate, I think White House will be a very strong minority leader of the Judiciary Committee. But like, Durbin was never going to get punished at the polls in the primary for being a weak-ass chair of the Judiciary Committee, for being weak on the courts, right? Republicans, I always like to go back to 2016, right? Donald Trump is running for president. He's down the escalator. He's the crazy man. He's like, oh, I'm going to jail Mexicans because they're rapists, and I'm going to do this. And here's my Supreme Court list that the Federal Society gave me, and it's completely normal. And now I'm back to being the crazy person. Even Trump gets real old school Mitt Romney Republican when it comes to the courts, because he knows that if he's not playing Republican ball on the courts, that will hurt him. He can do whatever else he wants, but he can't fuck around with the courts because he knows he'll get punished by Republicans if he messes around with the courts. Please tell me the last time you saw a Democrat who was afraid of what his own voters would do to them if they were weak on the courts. So that's what we can do. I believe that's why I was put on this earth. It's to try to get people to hold Democratic officials accountable for their judicial nominations, for their commitment to strong and aggressive liberal courts, because that is how you beat the Federal Society and the Republicans.
Elie Mystal, y'all. And
Thank you so much for having me.
he will be upstairs signing books and taking your remaining questions. It was a true pleasure.